Growing up, I always knew I wasn't the favorite. I didn't need anyone to say it aloud. The way my parents looked at Ryan, the way they defended him no matter what he did, the way they ignored my efforts, it all painted the picture clearly. Ryan was the golden child. I was just the other one. He could set the house on fire, and they'd find a way to blame the lighter. I could bring home a straight-A report card, and all I'd get was a nod, maybe a quiet good job, while they rushed off to bail Ryan out of whatever trouble he'd gotten himself into this time. Ryan was reckless, impulsive, loud. He had dreams, big ones, though he never worked for any of them. He wanted to be a YouTuber, then a real estate mogul, then a day trader. My parents funded every phase. Every failure was excused as a stepping stone. Every dollar spent was an investment in his future. I, on the other hand, learned to keep my head down and work hard. I got my first job at 16, flipping burgers at a local fast food joint while Ryan was sneaking out to parties and crashing cars. I paid for my books, my phone, and eventually my college tuition. I never asked for help. I never expected it. Somewhere deep down, I think I always knew that any help they gave me would come with strings, a debt of gratitude they would collect when it suited them. By 25, I had built a modest but stable life. I worked as a systems analyst at a mid-sized tech firm. I wasn't rich, but I was careful. I had savings. I had a plan. I had peace. But peace doesn't last long in a family built on imbalance. It started with a call from Ryan one Saturday morning. His voice was lower than usual, and for once, he didn't sound arrogant. He sounded desperate. "Hey man, I need a small favor. Just like $2,000. It's just temporary. I swear I'll pay it back next month." I hesitated. Every instinct in me screamed no. But then my mom called later that same day. She didn't even ask about the money directly. She just said, "Your brother's struggling right now. He just needs a little kindness. You've always been the strong one." That line. That cursed line. I wired him the money. He never paid it back. A month passed. Then 2. I didn't ask, just waited, hoping maybe he'd at least acknowledge it. But he didn't. And then came another call. Things didn't work out. "I just need another $3,000. I swear this time." I said no. What followed was a storm. He hung up. Minutes later, my phone rang again, Mom. Furious. Disappointed. She said I was selfish. That I was abandoning my family. That Ryan was going to be homeless because of me. I didn't answer her next call. Or the one after that. I started to keep my distance. Less visits. Shorter phone calls. I stopped telling them about my life. I didn't tell them when I got promoted. I didn't tell them when I moved to a slightly bigger apartment. I didn't tell them anything. But they noticed. Parents always do. They saw the new furniture when they came over uninvited. They noticed my new laptop, the extra monitor, the coffee machine in the kitchen. They began to ask questions in their usual roundabout way. "Must be nice to live alone with no one to worry about. We gave you everything, and now you act like a stranger." But I didn't rise to it. I didn't explain myself. I knew it wouldn't matter. My success would always be seen as arrogance. Ryan's failure would always be seen as misfortune. And then one night, while working late on a freelance project, I received an alert from my bank. "Unrecognized login attempt blocked. Please verify if this was you." I wasn't logged in. I hadn't even opened the banking app that day. My heart sank. I checked the location. It was my hometown. My parents' house. I didn't want to believe it. It had to be a coincidence, right? Maybe Ryan's trying to access his own bank account from a weird IP address? But I knew better. I felt it in my gut. Still, I said nothing. I waited. A day passed. Then 2. Nothing. No mention of it. No calls. No apologies. Just silence. So I set a trap. I created a new email account. Linked it to a fake banking profile I designed using an old project template. It looked real enough. I named the account Emergency Fund and left a note in the drafts. $118,000 moved from stocks to savings for security. May move to crypto soon. Login details saved on home laptop. Then I waited. 2 days later, I got another alert. Another login attempt. This time successful. They had the password. My password. The one I used on my personal laptop the last time I visited home. My own family had tried to steal from me. The betrayal cracked something in me. Not a loud, dramatic shattering. It was quiet. Cold. Final. I changed every password. Set up 2-factor authentication on everything. I notified my real bank. I installed keystroke trackers on my old laptop, just in case. And then I called my lawyer. Not the family lawyer. My lawyer. Because if my own blood could stoop this low, then I wasn't family anymore. I was prey. And I was done playing nice that I didn't confront them. Not yet. Confrontation meant playing into their hands, and I had learned that the hard way. In my family, conversations were really just one-sided battles where logic had no place. I wasn't going to let my parents manipulate me into feeling guilty for their mistakes. They had crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let them get away with it. Instead, I focused on the evidence. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah, advised me to keep everything under wraps for now. It wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about making sure they couldn't escape the consequences of their actions. The login attempts, the digital traces, the stolen passwords, everything pointed to one thing. My parents and Ryan had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Sarah told me to gather everything I could. The bank alerts, the digital footprints, any text messages or emails that could prove my case. For the next few days, I turned into a meticulous investigator. I set up security on all my devices, activated notifications for every financial account I had, and even set up a few traps in my home network to monitor further attempts. It was during one of these late-night sessions that I received another email, this time from Ryan himself. "I know you're pissed, but you're my brother. I don't have anyone else. Please just help me out. I'm in over my head. I'll pay you back, I swear. You're the only one who can save me." I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. Ryan's words were laced with the usual mix of guilt and desperation. He was a master at it, always using his charm and victimhood to manipulate others. I felt the familiar tug of pity in my chest, but it was immediately followed by a wave of anger. How many times had I been here before? How many times had I helped him, only to watch him squander everything? This time was different. This time, there would be no saving him. There would be no bailing him out. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence itself would send a message. A week passed, and I didn't hear from my parents. I knew they were trying to avoid me. Maybe they thought I'd come crawling back, like I always did in the past. Maybe they thought I'd just forget what happened. But I didn't. Not this time. I had made my decision. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect. It was about standing my ground when I had been ignored, taken for granted, and used for far too long. I had worked my ass off to get where I was, and no one, least of all my family, had the right to take that from me. I thought about reaching out to my parents directly. I considered confronting them face to face, laying out all the evidence. But I knew it wouldn't matter. They would apologize, make excuses, maybe even beg. But they'd never truly understand. They'd never truly change. I had spent years hoping they would, but now I realized that I couldn't keep sacrificing my peace for people who would never value it. So I took a different route. I hired a forensic investigator. Her name was Lisa, and she specialized in uncovering digital fraud. She was calm, methodical, and she knew how to handle situations like mine with precision. She started by digging into the login attempts, the transactions, the unauthorized access to my bank. She worked her magic, going through my digital life with a fine-toothed comb, and what she uncovered shocked even me. Ryan and my mother had been accessing my financial accounts for months. They had slowly siphoned off small amounts, thinking I wouldn't notice. Each transaction was just under the threshold for a notification, $1 here, $50 there. It wasn't enough to raise alarms, but when added up, it was clear they had been systematically stealing from me. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. Lisa uncovered an encrypted file on my home network, a file that contained all my personal banking details, passwords, and even my social security number. It was clear that my parents, with Ryan's help, had been trying to access more than just my savings. They had been trying to take everything. My identity. My future. That's when I knew what I had to do. I gathered everything, every email, every piece of evidence. I had it all. And now, I was ready to make them pay. But it wasn't going to be a simple lawsuit. No, this needed to be more than that. This needed to be a lesson, a clear, undeniable demonstration that you can't just take from people without consequences. I wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. I was going to make them regret every single choice they had made. I started by contacting the authorities. I didn't know if they would take the case seriously, but I had all the proof I needed. Lisa had already alerted them about the illegal access to my accounts, and the investigation was moving forward. The police didn't get involved right away, but they started gathering the evidence, preparing for what would come next. I also reached out to the bank. They were stunned by the depth of the fraud. They assured me they would take all necessary precautions to protect my account from further intrusion, but I wasn't satisfied with just that. I needed more. I needed to make sure this didn't just end in a slap on the wrist. And then the hardest part came, the confrontation. I called my parents. I knew they were expecting me to cave, to give in, but I wasn't about to play by their rules anymore. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk." There was a long silence on the other end. Then my father's voice came through, calm but hesitant. "What's going on, son? You've been distant lately. We're worried about you." "No, Dad. You're worried about yourselves. You've been stealing from me for months. I have proof." The line went silent again. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Finally, my mom spoke. "What do you mean stealing?" "You know exactly what I mean," I replied. "You tried to hack my bank account. You accessed my personal files. You've been taking small amounts from me for months, thinking I wouldn't notice. But I did." There was a pause. My parents were always good at pretending things weren't happening, at brushing things under the rug. But they couldn't escape this. Not this time. "Son, please, this is a misunderstanding. We were just trying to help." "Ryan, don't bring Ryan into this," I cut in. "You've defended him his whole life, and look where it's gotten us. I'm done. You've crossed a line that can't be undone." I let the words hang in the air. There was no going back now. They knew what I had on them. They knew I wouldn't back down. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never felt before, empowerment. That was the beginning of it all. The moment I took control of my life. The moment I stopped being the backup plan, the one who could be manipulated. I was done with being the strong, silent one. Now, I was the one in control. I didn't know where this road would lead, But one thing was certain. My parents and brother would regret what they had done to me. And I wasn't going to let them forget it. The days after the call were a blur. I stayed focused, consumed by the idea of taking back control. But as much as I wanted to feel relief, the reality of the situation was heavier than I had anticipated. My parents had crossed a line, and the anger that simmered inside me only grew stronger as I thought about it. I had always hoped they would change, that one day they would see me as an equal, but I had come to realize that they would never change. And that was something I had to accept. The next few weeks were filled with tense silences at family gatherings, brief exchanges that felt more like obligations than genuine conversations. My parents, particularly my mom, tried to play the victim, but I saw through it. She tried to act like she didn't understand what I was accusing them of, as though this was all a misunderstanding. But I knew better. This wasn't a mistake. They had planned it. They had been using me for their own selfish reasons for far too long. Ryan, on the other hand, didn't even bother to apologize. He was too caught up in his own mess, and I wasn't about to be his escape route anymore. Every time I thought about what they had done, my blood boiled. It wasn't just the money or the betrayal. It was the fact that they had tried to steal my identity, to take everything I had worked for. They wanted to destroy everything I had built. I had been walking on eggshells for so long, trying to keep the peace, trying to keep everyone happy. But this time, there was no going back. This time, I was fighting for myself. Sarah, my lawyer, called me the next morning. I've looked over everything, and I think we're ready to take action. We need to move quickly. The longer this goes on, the harder it will be to hold them accountable. I had spent the last few days in deep thought, weighing my options. There were so many ways this could play out, but I had no intention of letting them get away with it. This wasn't just about the money. It was about showing them that their actions had consequences. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. Let's do it. Sarah wasted no time. We filed a formal complaint with the authorities and notified the bank about the fraudulent activity. We also began compiling everything into a case that would hold my parents and Ryan accountable for their actions. The investigation was slow, but it was happening. And as the days passed, the weight of what I was about to do settled heavily on my shoulders. I wasn't just exposing them for their theft. I was exposing the entire facade of my family. I was digging into the truth that I had buried for years. My mom and dad kept calling, but I didn't pick up. I had nothing left to say to them. They knew what they had done. They knew that I wasn't going to let it slide. Then came the day I had been dreading. My father showed up unannounced at my apartment. I opened the door to find him standing there, his face pale, his eyes avoiding mine. He looked older than I remembered. Maybe it was the guilt, or maybe it was just the realization that his own son had turned against him. Either way, he didn't look like the man who had always been in control. Son, he started, his voice hesitant. We need to talk. I didn't invite him in. I wasn't going to let him spin this into another one of his emotional manipulations. I stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, waiting for him to speak. I know what you're doing, he said quietly. I know you've contacted the authorities. But I need you to understand something. You're going too far. Too far. I repeated, incredulity rising in my voice. You're accusing me of stealing from you for months, and I'm going too far? You don't understand, son, he said, taking a step closer. This was all for Ryan. He's not like you. He needs help. He's in over his head, and we were just trying to help him out. You were using me, Dad, I said, the words barely holding back the rage. You've always used me. I'm not your ATM. I'm not the backup plan anymore. He faltered for a moment, then took a deep breath. I didn't mean to hurt you. I never did. I just wanted to protect my son. By stealing from me? His face twisted in frustration. It wasn't like that. It was a mistake. You'll see. We'll work it out. You can't do this, son. You can't ruin everything. I felt a pang of sadness, but it quickly faded into anger. You've already ruined everything. You crossed a line, and now there's no going back. He didn't respond. He just stood there, looking defeated. I realized then that he wasn't sorry. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He was just scared of the consequences, scared of losing his grip on me. But it was too late for apologies. I had made my decision, and I was going to see this through. The following week, the investigation hit a turning point. The authorities had uncovered more than I had expected. It wasn't just my accounts that had been compromised. There were several others that my parents and Ryan had tried to access. It seemed like they had been running a scheme, stealing money from various sources and laundering it through different accounts. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was fraud. As the authorities began to get involved, I started to receive more threatening messages from Ryan. He called me late one night, his voice trembling with panic. You don't understand, man, he pleaded. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I was just desperate. But if you go through with this, everything's going to fall apart. You don't know what they're capable of. I know exactly what they're capable of, I said, my voice calm but firm. And I'm done. Ryan's voice cracked. Please, just give me one more chance. I'll make it right. I swear. I knew better than to believe him. I'd heard it all before. But this time, there was no saving him. There was no going back. With the investigation continuing, it became clear that my parents and Ryan were in deeper trouble than they had anticipated. The fraud charges were serious, and the authorities were looking into their activities with more scrutiny. I had no idea how this would all end, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. As the legal process unfolded, I kept my distance. I focused on my work, my own life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire family had been a lie. All the years of pretending, of covering for them, of swallowing my anger for the sake of keeping the peace, it all felt like a waste now. And in a way, it was freeing. I was finally free from their control. Free from the burden of being the one who always had to make things right. But the road ahead wasn't easy. There would be more battles to fight, more lies to uncover, and more consequences to face. But for the first time in my life, I was ready to face them. The following weeks were a whirlwind. My family's situation continued to unravel, and I had to balance the reality of what was happening with the constant pressure of dealing with my own emotions. I had never imagined that things would go this far. What had started as a small betrayal had turned into a full-blown scandal. But in the back of my mind, I knew I had done the right thing. No one else was going to hold my parents accountable but me. It was surreal to think about how everything had changed. There were times when I would lie awake at night, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had sacrificed so much for my family over the years, time, energy, and even my own happiness, but I had reached a breaking point. The years of enabling them, of hoping for change, had taken their toll. I had always been the dutiful son, the one who put family first. But that time was over. Now, I was playing a different game. This was my life, my future, and no one was going to take that from me, not even my parents. The investigation into the fraud continued. Each day, I got more updates from Sarah, my lawyer, who was now working alongside a team of investigators. As we delved deeper into my parents' activities, the scope of their deception became clearer. It wasn't just about my bank accounts anymore. It was about a complex network of financial fraud involving multiple victims across different states. They had set up fake identities, manipulated online systems, and even tried to disguise their tracks with offshore accounts. My parents, whom I had once believed to be ordinary, were now revealed to be deeply involved in something much larger and more dangerous. I spent hours reviewing documents with Sarah, trying to understand the full extent of their operation. The more we uncovered, the more my heart sank. My family wasn't just guilty of financial theft. They were involved in organized crime. It was almost as if they had been living a double life, hiding their true intentions behind the facade of being loving, well-meaning parents. But now, all of that was coming to light. The hardest part was knowing that they had tried to involve me. If they had been successful in hacking my accounts, if I hadn't caught them, I might have found myself caught up in their web. But I had. And now I had to make sure they didn't escape the consequences of their actions. Ryan's attempts to reach out didn't stop. He called me several times a day, his voice always frantic. He would leave long, emotional voicemails, apologizing for everything, begging me to help him, promising that he would make things right. But it was always the same desperate tone, the same empty promises. I didn't return his calls. There was nothing left to say. One night, I finally answered. I was tired of hearing his voice, tired of the guilt trips. He needed to hear the truth, whether he liked it or not. Ryan, I said, cutting through his usual pleading. This isn't your fault. It's theirs. Mom and Dad made their choices. They've crossed a line, and I'm not going to save them. I'm done. There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his mind, trying to figure out how to twist the conversation to his advantage. Please, he said, his voice trembling. I didn't want any of this to happen. But I'm stuck. I can't fix it alone. You've never tried to fix anything, I shot back. You've always relied on other people to get you out of trouble. But not this time, Ryan. Not me. Not anyone. This is on you. The line went silent for a long time. And then, just before he hung up, I heard him say, I guess we're really done, huh? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was out there. Ryan had chosen his path long ago. And I had chosen mine. The legal process was long, drawn out, and emotionally draining. But it was necessary. My lawyer, Sarah, continued to push forward with the case, building a strong argument against my parents. As the investigation progressed, the authorities began to get more involved, and soon, my parents were facing charges they had never imagined. It wasn't just financial fraud anymore. It was identity theft, conspiracy, and racketeering. I spent countless hours in meetings, gathering evidence, preparing testimony. It was hard to watch as everything I had known about my family crumbled before my eyes. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the sense of justice that had taken root in my heart. I had spent too long trying to protect them, trying to fix their mistakes. But I wasn't doing that anymore. This time, they would face the consequences. As my parents faced the legal system, their behavior became more erratic. My father, who had once been the pillar of the family, was now a shell of himself. He would send me long, rambling messages, trying to justify his actions. But I knew better than to fall for it. He was trying to manipulate me one last time. My mom, on the other hand, took a different approach. She went into denial, pretending that none of this was real. She tried to convince herself that the system would never catch them, that everything would blow over. But it wouldn't. It couldn't. One evening, as I sat in my apartment going over some legal papers, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. But then I picked it up. Hello, son. My father's voice came through, shaky and strained. I'm sorry. I know I've done a lot of things wrong, But please, please don't do this. Don't let them take everything. We're family. I need you. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. There was no emotion left. The words they had used for years to manipulate me, guilt, love, fear, no longer had any power over me. I was done. Dad, I said firmly, this is the consequence of your actions. You made your choices. You have to face them. But you're my son. We've been through so much together, he pleaded. I'm not the backup anymore, I replied coldly. You can't keep using me like this. I'm done. And with that, I hung up. In the weeks that followed, I began to feel a strange sense of peace. The tension that had haunted me for so long was finally starting to lift. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from the expectations, the manipulation, and the constant emotional turmoil that had defined my relationship with my family. The battle was far from over, but I had won the first step. I had taken control of my life. I didn't know how this story would end, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let my parents, or anyone else, take advantage of me ever again. As the legal battle continued, things began to take a toll on me. I had thought that cutting my parents off would bring relief, but it didn't. I had never fully realized how much their presence had consumed my life, and now that they were essentially out of it, there was an overwhelming void. I felt the weight of their actions, the guilt of cutting ties, and the pressure of the public nature of everything. The constant phone calls from the media didn't help either. My family's story had caught the attention of several news outlets, and soon, it became a media frenzy. The details of the fraud case were now out in the open, and with it came an avalanche of questions. Everyone wanted to know how I felt, what I was doing, and how I had managed to unearth the truth about my family's financial crimes. I avoided the media as much as possible. The last thing I wanted was to become the center of attention for something so tragic. But there was no escaping it. Every time I left the house, cameras were flashing and reporters were lingering at my doorstep. I became a spectacle, not for any accomplishment, but for the unraveling of my own family. It felt like the entire world was watching as my life turned into a reality TV show, and I hated it. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the pain. The pain of realizing that the people who were supposed to protect me, who were supposed to love me, had spent their lives trying to manipulate me. I had trusted them for so long. But it wasn't just about the money. It was the emotional manipulation that had hurt the most. The lies, the guilt trips, the expectations. They had shaped my life in ways I couldn't even fully comprehend until now. And Ryan, my brother. I hadn't heard from him in days. I wondered where he was, what he was doing, and whether he would face the same consequences as our parents. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer him a lifeline. But another part of me knew that he needed to face his actions. Just like my parents. One day, as I was sitting in my office, my phone rang. It was Sarah, my lawyer. I had grown used to receiving updates from her. But this time, her voice was different. She sounded concerned. I think it's time we talk, she said. We've reached a critical point in the case, and things are starting to get serious. I sat up, my pulse quickening. What's going on? They're starting to turn on each other, Sarah explained. Your parents are beginning to point fingers at Ryan, claiming that he was the mastermind behind the whole scheme. And Ryan's trying to do the same to them. It's turning into a mess. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what she was saying. So they're blaming each other? Yes, she said. And here's the thing. If this continues, it could significantly reduce their sentences. If we can prove that they were coerced or manipulated by Ryan, there's a chance they could get off with a lighter penalty. Are you saying they might get away with this? I asked, anger creeping into my voice. After everything they've done? We still have the evidence we need to push this through, Sarah assured me. But we have to make a decision soon. They're trying to make a deal with the authorities, and that could mean they're trying to get off easier. We need to make sure they face the consequences for everything. I was quiet for a moment, my mind racing. The thought of them escaping justice made my blood boil. They didn't deserve leniency. They had ruined my life, and now they wanted to play the victim? I wouldn't let that happen. No, I said firmly. We fight. We go all the way. No deals. As the legal proceedings continued, the media frenzy around my family's case grew. Every day there were new headlines, new reports, and new updates. It felt like my life was being dissected and laid bare for the world to see. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. But I had come too far to back down now. I wasn't about to let my parents get away with what they had done, no matter how many headlines they garnered, that I didn't know how long it would take for everything to unfold. But I was prepared for the long haul. I stayed focused, determined to get justice, not just for myself, but for all the people who had been affected by their actions. I had already made the decision to cut ties with my family, and now I was making sure they faced the consequences of their actions. But as the weeks went by, things became more complicated. The pressure from the media increased. The authorities were still piecing everything together, and there were moments when it felt like the whole world was closing in on me. The stress was overwhelming, and there were days when I didn't know how I was going to get through it. Then one evening, I received an unexpected visitor. I was sitting at home, going over some legal documents, when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Ryan standing there, his face drawn and pale. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. What do you want? I asked, my voice cold. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability in his eyes. I need to talk to you. Please. I hesitated, unsure whether I was ready for this. But something in his face made me pause. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat down in silence for a moment, both of us unsure where to begin. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, his hands trembling slightly. I don't know how things got this bad. I really don't. I thought I could control it. I thought it would all work out. But now I've lost everything. I looked at him, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. You've lost everything because of your own choices, Ryan. You've hurt everyone who's ever cared about you. And now you're asking for sympathy. I never asked for sympathy, he replied, his voice cracking. I just don't know how to fix this. I'm not like you, man. I'm not strong enough to handle it. I just need someone to help me. I felt a flicker of guilt. I had been so focused on my own anger that I hadn't thought about the person Ryan had become. But that didn't change the fact that he had betrayed me just like our parents had. I'm not your savior, Ryan, I said, my voice firm. I'm not going to fix your mistakes. You need to face what you've done. He nodded, his shoulders sagging. I know. I'm sorry. I just wanted you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't know how to respond. My heart ached for him, but I couldn't forget the damage he had caused. Maybe it's too late for apologies, I said, my voice quiet. But I hope you get the help you need. As Ryan left, I felt a strange sense of closure. For the first time, I understood that I couldn't fix everything. I couldn't save him. And I had to stop trying to fix things that were beyond repair. The case was still ongoing, but I knew one thing. I had made the right choice. The road ahead would be long, and the consequences of their actions would ripple through my life for years to come. But I was ready for it. I was prepared to face whatever came next as the case progressed. It became clearer just how far-reaching my parents' actions had been. What started as a personal betrayal had spiraled into something much larger. A criminal investigation with deep connections and multiple victims. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that I had only scratched the surface of their deceitful empire. The thought of them orchestrating such a vast operation, using me as a pawn in their game, made my blood boil. It wasn't just about the $40,000 debt anymore. That was just the tip of the iceberg. My parents had manipulated financial systems, stolen identities, and used underhanded tactics to hide their activities. They had created fake businesses, falsified documents, and even made shady deals with people I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I was stunned by the scope of it all. It was clear that they had been planning this for years, building their empire in the shadows while pretending to be the loving, ordinary family. I couldn't believe it. Every memory of my childhood, every time I'd been proud of them, every instance when I had trusted them, seemed like a lie now. My entire life had been built on a foundation of deceit. They had used me, manipulated me, and lied to me for so long that I didn't even know who they really were anymore. One day, as I was going over some documents, Sarah called me with an update. Her voice was serious, more so than usual. We've got a problem, she said. I sat up straight, my heart racing. What's happened? It's Ryan, she said, her tone grave. We've learned that he's been involved in more than just the debt. He's been helping your parents with the fraudulent activities. He's been laundering money through various accounts, setting up fake identities, and even getting involved in some illegal transactions. My stomach churned. You're telling me Ryan knew about all of this? Yes, Sarah confirmed. He's been a part of it from the start. We've got evidence linking him to some of their biggest financial schemes. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Ryan, my own brother? How could he have been involved in something like this? All these years, I had thought he was just a victim, someone who had been dragged into the mess by our parents. But now it seemed like he had willingly chosen this path. Are you sure? I asked, my voice trembling. You verified everything? Yes, Sarah replied. We've got witnesses, bank records, and even communication logs. He's not innocent in this. I felt a wave of betrayal wash over me. The last bit of hope I had clung to, that maybe Ryan hadn't been fully complicit, was now gone. He had been just as involved as our parents, and it hurt more than I could have imagined. I didn't know what to do. The person I had once trusted most, the person I had always defended, was now part of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed my life. I felt sick to my stomach. My brother had always been a complicated person, but I had never thought he would betray me like this. In the days that followed, I found myself spiraling. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had known was a lie. I spent hours alone, reflecting on the years I had spent trying to protect my family, trying to hold everything together. And now it felt like it was all for nothing. I had fought so hard to get to the truth, but the truth was darker than I could have ever imagined. I had to make a decision. I had to decide whether I was going to confront Ryan, or if I was going to distance myself completely from him, just as I had done with our parents. I couldn't let him manipulate me any longer. But at the same time, a part of me wanted to believe that he could change, that he could redeem himself. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I couldn't keep making excuses for him. Then, one night, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but something told me it was him. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello. Hey, Ryan's voice crackled through the line, barely above a whisper. It's me. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. What do you want, Ryan? I need to talk to you, he said, his voice shaky. I know what you're thinking. I know you probably hate me right now, but I never wanted any of this to happen. I got in too deep, and now it's too late. I'm sorry. I clenched my fists, holding back the anger that bubbled to the surface. Sorry. You've been lying to me, Ryan. You've been part of this whole thing from the start, and now you expect me to just forgive you. No, he said quickly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know that I'm not like Mom and Dad. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want any of this to happen. Then why didn't you say something sooner? I asked, my voice cold. Why didn't you come clean before it all spiraled out of control? I didn't know how, he admitted, his voice breaking. I didn't want to lose you. You're the only family I've got left. Please, I don't know what to do anymore. The desperation in his voice caught me off guard. It was raw, genuine, but it didn't change anything. It didn't change the fact that he had played a part in destroying everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in. I can't help you anymore, Ryan, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. You made your choices. And now, you have to face the consequences. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, in a small, broken voice, Ryan said, I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to go this far. I know, I said softly. But it's too late now. With that, I hung up. As I sat there in the silence, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I had made my decision. I had let go of the hope that Ryan could change, just as I had let go of the hope that my parents would ever be anything other than what they were. They had made their choices, and now it was time for them to pay the price. The case wasn't over yet, but I knew I was on the right path. The evidence we had was undeniable. My parents, and now Ryan, would have to face the consequences of their actions. And I would finally be free from the toxic grip they had held over my life. But the journey wasn't just about the legal battle. It was about rebuilding my life piece by piece. For the first time in years, I was starting to feel like I could breathe again. I was no longer a prisoner to the lies and manipulation of my family. I was in control of my own future. It wasn't going to be easy, and there were still many challenges ahead. But I was determined. I had made it through the darkest period of my life, and I was stronger for it. No matter what happened next, I knew one thing. I was never going back. The weeks following my final conversation with Ryan were the hardest of my life. The case had taken a toll on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about the financial losses, the legal battle, or the public humiliation. It was about the emotional toll. I had spent so many years trying to protect my family, trying to fix their mistakes, and now, I was left with nothing but the ashes of what had once been. The life I had built, the people I had trusted, were all gone. I poured myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the growing sense of loss. Every day, I forced myself to focus on the tasks at hand. But the constant reminders of what had happened, the calls from my lawyer, the endless media coverage, the gossip in the streets, were inescapable. My family's fall from grace had become the story of the year, and I couldn't outrun it. Despite the pressure, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. For the first time in my life, I had taken control. I had stood up for myself, stood up for the truth, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all my own family, dictate my future. But just when I thought I was starting to regain my footing, a bombshell dropped. Sarah, my lawyer, called me one afternoon, her voice frantic. We've got a huge problem, she said. You need to come to the office immediately. I dropped everything and rushed to her office, my heart pounding in my chest. When I arrived, Sarah was waiting for me, her face pale and tight with anxiety. What's going on? I asked, my voice low. Your parents have made a deal with the prosecution, Sarah explained. They've agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. They're going to testify against Ryan. My stomach dropped. What? Are you telling me they're going to get off lightly after everything they've done? I'm afraid so, Sarah said. But there's more. They're not just going to testify against Ryan. They're going to try to shift the blame onto you. I froze, the words sinking in. What do you mean, shift the blame onto me? They're going to claim that you were the one who orchestrated the fraud. They're going to say that you manipulated them into getting involved, that you were the mastermind behind everything. I shook my head in disbelief. This is insane. How could they even think that anyone would believe them? They're going to try, Sarah said grimly. They've already started planting seeds. The media is running with their narrative, and we need to act fast if we're going to stop it. I sat back in my chair, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My own parents, the people who had ruined my life, were now turning the tables and trying to make me the villain. I felt a surge of anger, but also fear. Fear of losing everything I had worked so hard to rebuild. They're trying to destroy me, I said, my voice shaking. They won't get away with this. We're going to fight this, Sarah reassured me. We have the truth on our side. The evidence is clear. But we need to act fast. They're going to use every trick in the book to discredit you. It's not just about the case anymore. It's about your reputation, your future. I nodded, my mind racing. I had spent so much time fighting for justice, but now I had to fight to protect everything I had left. My parents had already taken so much from me, and I couldn't let them take more. I couldn't let them drag me down any further. Did I end the days that followed? Things escalated quickly. My parents' accusations gained traction in the media. Headlines began to pop up accusing me of masterminding the entire scheme, of using my family as pawns in some twisted game. I watched as my name was dragged through the mud, my reputation tarnished in a way I couldn't have imagined. The worst part, some people believed it. Some people believed that I was capable of what they were accusing me of. I spent hours going over the evidence with Sarah, preparing for the fight ahead. We knew we had to expose the truth, but the task seemed monumental. How could we prove that I was innocent when my own parents were willing to lie so convincingly? The pressure was overwhelming. My phone was constantly ringing, but I ignored the calls from reporters and strangers. The only person I could rely on was Sarah, and even then, I knew the stakes were high. There were days when I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of the situation threatened to crush me, and I often found myself questioning whether it was even worth fighting. But every time I thought about giving up, I thought of my future. I had worked so hard to get here, to reclaim my life after everything my family had done. I couldn't let them destroy it all. I couldn't let them win. Then, one night, everything changed. I received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "Your parents are lying. Here's the proof." I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside was a file, and when I opened it, I saw something that made my heart race. It was a series of emails that my parents had sent to various people, detailing their fraudulent activities. These emails contained the kind of damning evidence that could end the case in one blow. Someone had sent me a smoking gun. I immediately forwarded the emails to Sarah, my hands trembling. "This could be the break we needed," I typed. "Do you think this is real?" "I'll confirm it," Sarah replied. "But if this is true, it's game over for them." The next few hours felt like an eternity. I sat in my office, staring at my screen, waiting for Sarah's response. Finally, her message came through. "It's legit," she said. "These emails are real. Your parents have been in contact with several people about laundering money and setting up fake accounts. We've got them." The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. After months of feeling trapped in a nightmare, it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. The truth was finally out. We immediately contacted the authorities, and within days, my parents were arrested. Their deal with the prosecution had been their last attempt to save themselves, but it was too late. The evidence against them was irrefutable. They couldn't lie their way out of this one. As the news broke, the media outlets were forced to retract their previous statements about me. The narrative had shifted. No longer was I the villain, I was the victim. Slowly but surely, my name was cleared. But even with the weight of the case lifted, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. My parents were gone, my brother was lost to his own choices, and I was left to pick up the pieces. But at least now, I had control over my own future. I wasn't a victim anymore. The legal battle had been long, painful, and filled with doubt, but I had made it through. I had won. And while my family may have been broken beyond repair, I was still standing. And that was enough. The arrest of my parents marked the beginning of a new chapter, but the transition wasn't as simple as it seemed. While I was now free from the lies and manipulations that had defined my life, there was still the matter of rebuilding everything that had been shattered. The legal proceedings were far from over, and I had to stay vigilant to make sure the truth remained front and center. The media was quick to sensationalize the case, and I knew I had to be careful about how I approached my own healing. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. I gave myself permission to take a step back, to pause, and process everything that had happened. The constant battle had taken its toll, and I knew I needed time to heal, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I spent a few weeks in solitude, away from the public eye. I took long walks in the park, went to the gym to clear my head, and spent hours reading. It was a luxury I hadn't had in so long, a break from the relentless pressure. But as I walked through the park one sunny afternoon, I realized that I couldn't remain hidden forever. Life was calling me back. I needed to confront my past. Not the past of my parents' deceit, but the life I had once shared with them, the memories I had been suppressing. I wasn't ready to forgive them, not yet, but I had to come to terms with who they were and what they had done. For my own sake. The first step was talking to Ryan. I hadn't heard from him since our last conversation, and the silence between us had been deafening. My thoughts were torn. Part of me still held on to the faint hope that he could change, that we could salvage something from the wreckage. But the other part of me knew that the brother I had once known no longer existed. It was a cold evening when he called. I could see his name flash on my phone, and for a moment I hesitated. Would I answer? Should I let him in again, even if it was just for closure? I took a deep breath and answered. "Ryan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey," he replied, his voice almost unrecognizable. "I don't know where to start. I know I've messed up. No, I've destroyed everything. I don't expect forgiveness, not now, but I wanted to reach out." I took a moment before responding. "You've caused a lot of damage, Ryan. Not just to me, but to everyone. I'm not sure how to feel about you right now. I don't even know who you are anymore." "I know," he said quietly. "I can't undo what I've done. But I'm not the person I was. I can't take back the lies, the pain, but I wanted to be honest with you for once. I wasn't dragged into it by mom and dad. I was complicit. I made my own choices, and I hate myself for it." I didn't respond immediately. His words stung, but there was something about his vulnerability that made me pause. For a brief moment, I felt the old bond we once shared, but I quickly reminded myself of the years of betrayal. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I said. "But I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to hear you out, but this doesn't change everything you've done." "I understand," he said. "I'm not asking for you to trust me. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right, even if it's just me, alone in this mess I've made. It was the first time in years that I felt like Ryan was actually speaking from the heart, but that didn't make the damage go away. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew one thing. It wasn't going to be easy. In the coming days, I worked tirelessly with Sarah to prepare for the next phase of the case. The public's opinion was shifting again, and now it was crucial to secure my position as the victim in the eyes of the law and the public. The emails from my parents had turned the tide, but there was still a lot of work ahead. The media had started to backtrack, but the damage had already been done. In an effort to regain control over the narrative, I did what I had been avoiding for so long. I decided to speak to the press. Not about the details of the case, but about my own experience, what I had gone through, and how I had come to terms with it. The interview was set up on a Friday morning. I had been nervous in the days leading up to it, but I had also felt an odd sense of empowerment. This was my chance to tell my story on my terms. It wasn't about my parents or Ryan or even the betrayal. It was about me and what I had learned through it all. I sat in front of the cameras, the spotlight shining down on me. The interviewer, a woman in her mid-30s, introduced herself before getting straight to the point. So tell us, what's it been like to discover that your parents have been involved in this kind of fraud? I took a deep breath, the weight of the question heavy on my chest. But I didn't flinch. It's been a shock. The people you trust most in the world can turn out to be the ones who hurt you the most. But I've come to realize that their actions don't define me. It's not just about the betrayal. It's about what I choose to do with the aftermath. And I choose to heal. I choose to rebuild. The interviewer nodded, clearly moved by my words. It must have been difficult to come to terms with the fact that your own brother was involved as well. I paused for a moment. This was the hardest part. It's something I'm still processing. Ryan made choices, but I can't live my life holding on to anger. I have to let go of that. For me, not for him. The interview aired later that week, and it was a turning point. It wasn't a full recovery, but it was a step toward regaining control of my life. The public now saw me as more than just a victim of my parents' crimes. I was someone who had faced the truth, someone who had the strength to rise above it. The case wasn't over, but I was closer than ever to having everything behind me. My parents' sentencing was looming, and soon, Ryan would face the consequences of his actions as well. I had done my part, exposed the truth, and rebuilt my life. Now, I had to wait for justice to unfold. But the hardest part was over. I had fought for my freedom, for my future, and for the truth. No matter what happened next, I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back to the life I had before. The past was gone. And I was finally free. It had been a few months since the interview aired, and life had started to return to some semblance of normal. The media frenzy had died down, and the court proceedings against my parents were finally winding to a close. They had pled guilty to most of the charges, and though they were facing significant time behind bars, the pressure of the case was starting to feel more like a distant memory. But even as things calmed down, I couldn't escape the lingering questions. What would happen to me now? Where did I go from here? It was early one morning when I received the call. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and when I saw Sarah's name flash on the screen, I knew it wasn't just another check-in. Hello, I said, trying to mask the knot in my stomach. Hey, it's Sarah. I need to talk to you about something important. My heart skipped a beat. What's going on? Is everything okay? Not exactly. There's been a development in your case. I need you to come to my office immediately. I felt a chill creep up my spine. What happened? I don't want to say too much over the phone. Just get here as soon as you can. The urgency in her voice sent a wave of panic through me. I didn't know what this was about, but I could tell it wasn't good. I arrived at Sarah's office within the hour, and as soon as I stepped into the lobby, I could feel the tension in the air. Her assistant looked at me with concern as I made my way back to her office. Sarah was pacing when I entered. Her usual calm demeanor was nowhere to be found. What's going on? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sit down, she said, gesturing toward the chair. This isn't easy to explain, but we've got a situation. I sat, my hands clammy. Just tell me. Sarah took a deep breath before continuing. There's been a major complication. Your parents' legal team has been working behind the scenes, trying to find a way to reduce their sentence. And they've come across something unexpected, something that involves you. I stared at her, my pulse racing. What do you mean? How could they possibly involve me again? Apparently, they've found something, some kind of evidence that might not have been fully examined during the trial. It's a technicality, something small but potentially damaging. They're trying to use it to appeal the case. And the worst part is, they're targeting you. I leaned forward, trying to process what she was saying. Are you telling me they're coming after me again? After everything that's happened? I'm afraid so, she replied. And there's more. They've filed a motion with the court, claiming that you had access to sensitive information about their financial dealings. They're suggesting that you were aware of the fraud all along, that you were complicit in what happened. I felt the air leave my lungs. This is insane. I've been cleared. The court already ruled that I'm innocent. I know, but they're pushing for a retrial. If they succeed, it could mean more scrutiny on you, more legal battles. We have to prepare for the possibility of this going to court again. The world around me seemed to tilt, and I had to steady myself. But why would they do this? Why try to destroy me even more after everything? They're desperate, Sarah said. They know they're going down for good, but they're trying to make sure they don't go alone. And they're willing to drag you down with them. For the next few days, I barely slept. The familiar sense of dread returned as I grappled with the idea of reliving the trauma. It felt like no matter what I did, no matter how far I had come, my parents were always going to be in my life, clinging to me like a shadow, trying to pull me back into their mess. Every time I checked my phone, there was a new message from Sarah, detailing the progress of their motions, their legal tactics, their attempts to find new evidence. They were relentless. It was at this point that I realized something crucial. I couldn't keep running. I had spent so long avoiding my past, trying to escape the damage my parents had caused, but I wasn't going to let them drag me back down. I had to face this head-on, that I decided to take a different approach. Instead of staying quiet, instead of allowing my family to control the narrative, I was going to take control of my own story. I reached out to a few trusted journalists, ones who had covered my case before, and arranged interviews with them. I knew the media had a tendency to sensationalize, but I also knew that if I told my side of the story, if I laid bare the truth of what had happened, it would make it much harder for my parents to manipulate the situation. For once, I wasn't going to let them make me the villain. The press conferences and interviews were intense. I sat in front of the cameras again, the weight of the past few months hanging over me. But I no longer felt powerless. I spoke about the case, about the impact it had had on my life, and most importantly, I spoke about my parents and what they had done. They've tried to destroy me, I said in one of the interviews, my voice firm. But I won't let them. I won't let them dictate my future, not anymore. It wasn't easy. The questions were pointed, sometimes accusatory, but I stuck to the facts. I refused to let anyone twist my words. I had been through enough, and now, I was reclaiming my voice. Within days, the public's perception of the case began to shift once again. My transparency, my willingness to face the truth head-on, resonated with people. The media was forced to refocus on the real story, my parents' lies and deceit, not my supposed involvement. But even as the public's sympathy grew, the legal battle raged on. My parents' legal team was still pushing their narrative, trying to find any way to bring me down. The pressure was immense, but this time, I felt ready for it. I wasn't the same person I had been when all of this started. I had learned how to fight, how to stand my ground, and most importantly, how to take back control of my own life. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the tide began to turn in my favor. The court denied my parents' request for a retrial. The evidence they had tried to present as new and damning was deemed inadmissible. Their plan to drag me back into their lies had failed. But it wasn't just the legal victory that mattered. It was the sense of closure, the understanding that no matter how hard they fought, no matter how desperate they became, I had won. The case was finally over. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relief. Instead, I felt exhausted. The battle had taken everything from me, but it had also taught me something invaluable. I was stronger than I had ever known. As I moved forward, I promised myself one thing. I would never again let anyone dictate my worth. Not my parents. Not my past. I would rebuild my life on my own terms, and no one could take that away from me. As the months passed, life began to settle into a strange new rhythm. It was a rhythm I hadn't expected, one that involved both quiet reflection and the pursuit of something new, something meaningful. The weight of the past still lingered in the corners of my mind, but I had grown to understand that my recovery wasn't going to be a linear process. There would be good days and bad days, moments when I felt empowered and others when the old wounds felt too raw to bear. But I had learned something essential during the long months of legal battles and media attention. My past didn't define me. It was a part of my story, yes, but it wasn't the whole story. I wasn't going to let the mistakes of others dictate my future any longer. I had spent so much of my life running from my family, hiding from the truth, and shielding myself from the pain. But after everything had settled, after the media storms, the court cases, and the endless stress, I knew it was time to stop running. I had to find a way to heal, to embrace the new version of myself that had emerged from the wreckage. The first step in that healing journey was confronting my own sense of self-worth. For years, I had let my parents' actions dictate how I viewed myself. I had believed their lies, internalized their manipulations, and convinced myself that I was somehow complicit in their crimes. But now I understood that their choices had nothing to do with me. I had been a victim in all of this, and it was time to stop blaming myself for their mistakes. I started seeing a therapist. It felt like a daunting step, but as soon as I walked into that office, I knew it was the right choice. Therapy helped me unpack the layers of trauma I had carried with me for years. It allowed me to explore the deep scars my parents had left on me, and it gave me a space to rebuild my sense of identity. Slowly but surely, I began to piece myself back together. One day, during one of our sessions, my therapist asked me something that changed the course of my recovery. "Have you ever thought about forgiveness?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. I froze. The word itself seemed so foreign to me. Forgiveness was something I had never considered, at least not for my parents. After everything they had done, the betrayal, the manipulation, the way they had tried to destroy my life, the idea of forgiveness felt impossible. "I don't know," I said quietly. "It doesn't seem like something they deserve. They don't deserve my forgiveness." My therapist nodded. "Forgiveness doesn't mean they're excused for their actions. It doesn't mean you're letting them off the hook. But forgiveness is about letting go of the hold they still have on your life. It's about freeing yourself from the anger and the hurt. I didn't have an answer right away, but I left that session thinking about it. I wasn't ready to forgive my parents, not yet. But maybe there was something to the idea of freeing myself from their grip. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about them. Maybe it was about me. In the weeks that followed, I found myself increasingly drawn to the idea of starting over. The thought of a fresh start had always been enticing, but now it felt necessary. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my parents' mistakes. I had to carve out a future for myself, one that was independent of everything that had come before. I made a list of goals, things I had always wanted to do, but had been too afraid or too distracted to pursue. At the top of the list was travel. I had always dreamed of seeing the world, experiencing new cultures, and escaping the constant chaos of my past. So I booked my first solo trip abroad. The trip was a revelation. I landed in Paris with nothing but a backpack and a camera, ready to take on the world. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom that was completely unfamiliar. I wandered the streets of the city, visiting museums, sitting in cafes, and letting myself get lost in the beauty of it all. There was no past to haunt me here, no court cases, no family drama. Just me, the open road, and the promise of new experiences. The people I met along the way reminded me that there was more to life than the pain I had endured. I made friends in every city I visited, each of them offering a new perspective, a new way of seeing the world. It was as if I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried for years. But even amidst the excitement of travel, I couldn't escape the truth. My parents' actions would always be a part of me. I couldn't erase the scars they had left, no matter how far I ran. But for the first time, I realized that I didn't need to erase them. I could accept them as part of my story, without letting them define me. When I returned home, I felt different. The weight of the past no longer held me captive. I wasn't just a victim of my parents' choices. I was someone who had taken control of their own life, who had rebuilt themselves from the ground up. I started a new job, one that challenged me in ways I hadn't imagined. I poured myself into my work, not as an escape, but as a way to prove to myself that I was capable of achieving my dreams. It wasn't easy. There were moments of self-doubt, moments when I questioned if I was truly worthy of success. But I pushed through. Ryan reached out to me again during this time. His messages were brief at first, just checking in to see how I was doing. But as the weeks went on, the messages became more frequent, and they took on a tone of genuine remorse. "I know I can't undo what I've done," he wrote in one message. "But I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm getting help. I'm trying to fix the damage I caused." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to shut him out completely. But another part of me, the part that had learned to heal and let go, wanted to believe that people could change. I finally agreed to meet him. The encounter was awkward at first, two people who had once been so close now strangers in a way. But as we talked, I realized that he wasn't the same person I had known before. He had made mistakes, big mistakes, but he seemed genuinely remorseful. "Do you think we can ever fix what's been broken?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to start over, but it's going to take time." And so, we began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. For the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own healing, not just waiting for the past to catch up with me. The journey was far from over, but as I sat on the balcony of my apartment one evening, watching the sun set over the city, I realized that I had come a long way. I wasn't the person I had been before all of this. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined to create a future that was entirely my own. As the seasons changed, so did my perspective on life. The small victories I had won over the past year, the job, the travels, the gradual rebuilding of my relationship with Ryan, were just the beginning of something far greater. It felt like I was slowly waking up from a long, dark sleep, my eyes adjusting to the bright light of possibility that I had been too afraid to look at for so long. But with every step forward, there was always that nagging feeling in the back of my mind. My parents' shadow still loomed over me, even from behind bars. Despite everything I had done to distance myself from their chaos, there were moments when the weight of their actions pulled me back, reminding me of all that I had lost. I had worked hard to regain my independence, but it wasn't enough to completely sever the ties that bound me to them. I couldn't escape the fact that they were the ones who had started this mess. They were the reason I had spent years questioning my worth, my decisions, and my ability to trust. One evening, after a long day of work, I sat down at my desk, flicking through some papers. As I reached for my cup of coffee, my phone buzzed. It was an email, one that made my stomach drop the moment I saw the sender's name. It was from my lawyer. Subject: urgent, possible appeal on your case. I clicked open the message, my hands trembling slightly. The email was brief, outlining that my parents' legal team was making one last-ditch effort to appeal the case. They were trying to get the charges against them reduced by arguing that they had acted out of desperation to save their family, framing it as a mistake rather than intentional fraud. But there was something more alarming in the email. The appeal wasn't just about their own case. It was about me too. They were claiming that I had knowingly participated in the scheme, that I had been complicit in their actions, and that they had been manipulated by my behavior. I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was reading. After everything we had gone through, The media, the legal battles, the years of my life I had lost to their deceit, they were still trying to destroy me, still trying to drag me down. I felt the old panic creeping back into my chest. It was as if all the progress I had made, the healing, the distance I had put between us, was unraveling before my eyes. It wasn't just that they wanted to get out of prison. It was that they were once again willing to sacrifice me to save themselves. I leaned back in my chair, my head spinning. How had it come to this? Why couldn't they just let me go? Why couldn't they accept the consequences of their actions? I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I wasn't the same person I had been when all of this started. I had grown. I had learned how to fight, how to stand my ground. And I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their web of lies. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings with Sarah, and frantic legal consultations. Sarah advised me to stay calm and to continue focusing on my work. The appeal was just another attempt to delay the inevitable. My parents' legal team had no new evidence, no real case. But it didn't stop them from trying. I spent hours drafting statements, preparing for the possibility that I would need to testify once again. I knew that this time, I wouldn't be the victim. I would be the one in control, the one telling the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it was. The legal system had always felt like an obstacle to me, a barrier between me and peace. But now, I realized that it was a tool, one I could use to protect myself and ensure that my voice was heard. A week later, the day of the appeal hearing arrived. I stood outside the courthouse, the familiar weight of fear settling into my chest. But there was something different this time. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't trembling in the face of my parents' lies. I had faced worse, and I had survived. Sarah met me outside, her presence grounding me in the chaos of the moment. "Ready?" she asked, her expression calm but determined. I nodded. "Let's do this." Inside the courtroom, my parents' defense team presented their case. They argued that the pressure of their financial troubles had led them to make decisions they wouldn't have otherwise made. They tried to paint themselves as victims of circumstance, as people who had simply lost control. But Sarah and I had anticipated this. We had prepared for every angle, every lie they might try to tell. When it was my turn to speak, I stood tall in the witness box, my hands steady as I looked at the judge and the jury. "I didn't know," I said, my voice clear. "I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know how deep their lies ran. All I knew was that I was their daughter, and I wanted to believe in them. I wanted to believe they were good people." I paused, taking a moment to gather myself. But I was wrong. They deceived me. They hurt me. They ruined my life, and now they're trying to ruin it again. I won't let them. The courtroom was silent as I finished speaking. I could feel the weight of my words, the truth that hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For the first time, I wasn't just a passive observer in this story. I wasn't the one being manipulated or controlled. I was the one in charge of my narrative. The hearing lasted for hours, but in the end, the appeal was denied. My parents were not granted a reduction in their sentences, and their attempts to drag me back into their lies were rejected. It was over. The final chapter of that part of my life had been written. In the days that followed, I allowed myself to relax for the first time in years. The pressure, the constant fear of what might happen next, was gone. For the first time in so long, I felt like I could breathe again. But there was still something that lingered, a sense of unfinished business. I knew that the wounds my parents had left on me would take time to heal. I knew that there would be moments when the past would resurface, trying to remind me of the person I used to be. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had fought for my future. I had fought for my freedom. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my parents, take that away from me. A few months later, I took another step in my healing journey. I contacted a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, someone who could help me work through the deeper emotional scars that my parents had left behind. It wasn't easy. Therapy never is. But it was necessary. And it was part of the process of reclaiming my life. With each session, I learned to confront the shame and guilt that I had carried for so long. I learned that I wasn't responsible for the choices my parents had made. I wasn't the one who had betrayed myself. I wasn't the one who had caused all this pain. Eventually, I returned to the life I had begun to rebuild. My job flourished, I traveled more, and I started to embrace the joy of living in a way I never had before. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. I would never let my past define me again. The months that followed the appeal were marked by a strange sense of calm, a peace that I had longed for but never thought I would find. I no longer had to fear my parents' attempts to undermine me, no longer had to look over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack. My life was mine again, and with that ownership came a new sense of purpose. But despite all the progress, there were moments when I would feel a flicker of doubt. The old anxiety would creep in, and I would wonder whether I had truly done enough to sever myself from the past. Had I truly healed, or was I just pretending to move on while still tethered to the very people who had hurt me? It was in those moments of vulnerability that I would remind myself how far I had come. The woman who stood before the mirror today was no longer the terrified girl who had once let her parents' mistakes control her. I had fought for my freedom, for my dignity, and I had won. I kept up with therapy, but it wasn't just about working through the trauma anymore. It was about growth. It was about building a life that was mine and mine alone. I began taking on new challenges, ones that forced me to stretch beyond what I thought I was capable of. I started volunteering at a local shelter, helping others who had suffered from toxic family dynamics or abusive relationships. It was healing to give back, to use my experience to help others navigate their own struggles. In a way, it was part of my recovery. It was my way of turning my pain into something positive. One evening, as I sat in a coffee shop, scrolling through social media, I saw something that made my heart stop. It was a post from my brother. The post was simple, a photo of him standing in front of a new car, his arm wrapped around a woman I didn't recognize. The caption read, "New beginnings." The feeling that washed over me was complicated. Part of me felt relief that he was moving on, that he was building a new life for himself, away from the destruction that had been our family. But another part of me felt an old, familiar ache. I had always hoped that my brother would eventually take responsibility for his actions, for his role in everything that had gone wrong. Instead, it seemed as if he was continuing to live in the bubble of denial that our parents had created for him. I didn't know if I would ever be able to forgive him for his role in all of this, for the way he had manipulated me, for the way he had taken sides with our parents when they dragged me through hell. But I knew that forgiveness wasn't something I could rush. It wasn't something that could be forced. Days passed, and I found myself wondering whether I should reach out to him, try to reestablish some kind of communication. But I was torn. I didn't want to reopen old wounds, but I also didn't want to live the rest of my life knowing that I had left things unsaid, unfinished. I sat down one evening, staring at my phone, the cursor blinking in front of a message I had been drafting for hours. I had started and deleted it countless times, unsure of the words that might bring us back together, or tear us apart once again. Finally, I hit send. "Hey Ryan," the message began. "I saw your post. I hope things are going well for you. I'm doing okay here. It's been a long road, but I'm moving forward just like you are. I'm not sure what the future holds for us, but I hope that we can find a way to talk things through sometime." I stared at the message for a long time, wondering if I had said too much or too little. But I hit send, then put my phone down, letting out a deep breath. There was no going back now. The response came a few days later. "I'm glad to hear you're doing well. It's been a crazy few years. I know I wasn't there for you when you needed me most, and I'm sorry for that. I was lost in my own stuff, and I didn't see how much I was hurting you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it, but I hope one day we can talk." I read the message over and over again, letting the words sink in. Part of me wanted to shout at him, to tell him all the ways he had hurt me, to demand an apology for the years of betrayal. But another part of me, one that was learning to heal, wanted to believe that he was sincere, that he was trying to take accountability for the things he had done. I didn't respond immediately. But over the next few days, I thought long and hard about what I wanted from him and what I needed from myself. I had spent too many years putting my worth in the hands of others, waiting for validation, waiting for someone to fix the broken parts of me. But I had learned that I was the only one who could do that. That forgiveness, if it came, would be for me, not for him. A week later, I sat down and typed a response. "I don't know if we'll ever be able to fix everything between us, Ryan. I don't know if we'll ever be able to erase the past or go back to what we had before. But I think I'm finally ready to talk. To try. Let's start there." And so it began. The slow, tentative rebuilding of our relationship. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect. We both had to work through years of resentment, hurt, and anger. But we took it one step at a time. We learned to listen to each other, to understand each other's pain, and to accept that we couldn't change the past. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the mistakes that had been made. But it was a start. Meanwhile, I continued to grow. The work I had done in therapy, the steps I had taken to reclaim my life, had all prepared me for this moment. I was no longer a victim of my circumstances. I was no longer at the mercy of my parents or my brother. I was in control of my own destiny, and that gave me a strength I never knew I had. There were still moments when I felt the sting of betrayal, when the old wounds flared up again. But I no longer let them define me. I had learned to take control of my story, to reshape it in a way that empowered me rather than kept me stuck in the past. And with each passing day, I felt more and more like the woman I had always wanted to be. The months that followed our tentative steps toward healing were some of the most challenging yet transformative of my life. Rebuilding any relationship, especially one as fractured as mine with Ryan, was never going to be easy. But I had learned through the years of turmoil that the most important part of healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about finding peace within myself, regardless of whether or not anyone else came along for the ride. Every time I felt the sting of old memories, I reminded myself of how far I had come. I had faced my parents' betrayal, stood up for myself in ways I never thought I could, and emerged victorious. My life, for the first time in a long while, felt like it was entirely in my own hands. But that didn't mean I had all the answers. That didn't mean I was free from doubt or fear. It simply meant that I had learned to deal with them, to acknowledge them, and move forward anyway. Ryan and I continued to talk slowly but steadily. Our conversations were awkward at first, filled with hesitations and unspoken words. There were still so many things between us that hadn't been addressed, so many questions left unanswered. But each time we spoke, it felt like a little more of the distance between us closed, even if just by a small amount. One evening, after a particularly long conversation, Ryan asked if he could visit me. He wanted to talk in person, to really try to understand everything I had been through, to find a way to make up for the years of silence. I hesitated at first. The wounds were still fresh, and the idea of opening myself up to him felt terrifying. But I also knew that if I was ever going to truly heal, I needed to confront the past, not run from it. When Ryan arrived at my apartment a few days later, I was surprised by how much time had passed since we'd last seen each other in person. It was strange, looking at him again after so many years, after everything that had happened. He looked older, more worn. I could see the weight of regret in his eyes. We didn't speak at first. We just stood there, both of us unsure of how to start, what to say. It was as if we had to relearn how to be around each other, how to be siblings again. Finally, Ryan spoke. I don't know how to do this, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I was lost. I let our parents control me, and I didn't see the damage it was causing until it was too late. I nodded slowly, trying to process his words. I know, but you have to understand, it wasn't just the things you did. It was the things you didn't do. The way you chose to stay silent when I needed you the most. He nodded, his eyes filled with shame. I know, and I'll never be able to make up for that. I'll never be able to undo the damage. But I want you to know that I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. We sat down together, and over the course of the next few hours, we talked. Really talked. We discussed the past, the choices we had both made, and the ways we had hurt each other without realizing it. It wasn't an easy conversation. There were tears, anger, and long silences, but there was also understanding, and most importantly, there was a shared desire to move forward. By the end of the evening, we weren't miraculously healed, but we had made progress. The trust we had lost wasn't going to come back overnight, but I had a sense of peace that I hadn't had in a long time. We had acknowledged the past and started to build a foundation for something new. We were siblings again, but this time it was different. We were two people who had each suffered, each hurt, and each learned how to survive. As I stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I couldn't help but reflect on how much my life had changed. The road I had walked had been anything but easy, but it had brought me here, to this moment of clarity, to this new chapter. I had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about learning how to live with it, how to use it as a strength instead of letting it hold me back. I had learned to forgive, not because the people who had hurt me deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I had learned to set boundaries, to speak my truth, and to put my own well-being above the expectations of others. I had learned to be whole, even when I had felt broken. But even as I moved forward, I couldn't ignore the fact that there was still one person who I hadn't yet confronted, my mother. My parents had been imprisoned for what they had done, and although I had cut ties with them for good, there was still a lingering question in my heart. Could I ever truly heal if I didn't face her? If I didn't understand why she had done what she had? I had spent so many years trying to escape her influence, trying to make sense of the chaos she had created. But now, as I stood at the edge of this new chapter in my life, I realized that confronting her might be the final step in freeing myself from the past. It was with this realization that I made a decision. I was going to write to her. I didn't know what I expected from the letter. Maybe an apology, though I wasn't holding my breath for one. Maybe an explanation, though I doubted she would ever be able to give me one that would make sense. But I knew that in order to move forward completely, I needed to let go of whatever unresolved feelings I had toward her. I needed to release the grip that her actions still had on me, even from a distance. The letter wasn't long. It was simple, direct, and honest. Mom, I don't know where to start, but I'll start with this. I've spent a long time trying to understand why you did the things you did. Why you chose to put me through the things you did. And I've realized that there's no answer that will ever make sense to me. What I've come to accept is that I can't keep looking for answers from you anymore. I've spent years carrying your mistakes with me, and I've realized that I don't need to. I don't need to hold on to the past, and I don't need to hold on to the anger I feel toward you. I need to let go. This is not about forgiving you or forgetting what you did. It's about releasing the hold you've had on my life, on my future. I can't change the past, and I don't expect you to either. But I do expect to move forward without you. This is goodbye. Your daughter. I sealed the letter and sent it off, not expecting a reply. But it didn't matter. The act of writing it had been cathartic enough. It was the final step, the one I needed to take to truly release myself from everything that had been weighing me down. The next few weeks were filled with more moments of growth and reflection. I had finally allowed myself to confront everything that had happened, and I had learned to embrace the lessons it had taught me. I was stronger than I had ever been, and I was no longer defined by the actions of others. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. As the weeks went by, I found myself settling into a new rhythm, one that felt natural, one that didn't require me to constantly look over my shoulder or second-guess my decisions. I had walked through the fire, and although the scars would remain, they no longer defined me. I was no longer the person who lived in fear of my family's manipulation, no longer the person who questioned my worth every time someone I loved chose someone else over me. I had learned to find peace in the small things. The mornings spent with a cup of coffee and a book, the weekends when I could escape the pressures of work and spend time volunteering at the shelter. These moments of quiet joy were the building blocks of a life I had crafted for myself, a life that was mine and mine alone. Still, there were moments of doubt. It's impossible to escape the past entirely, and I would sometimes find myself questioning my own actions, wondering if there had been more I could have done to fix things sooner. But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of the progress I had made, of the strength I had shown in walking away from everything I once thought was important. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about learning to live authentically, regardless of the judgment or expectations of others. And that was something I was finally beginning to understand. One day, I received a phone call from an unknown number. It was rare for me to pick up calls from numbers I didn't recognize, but something told me this one was important. I answered cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "Hello," I said, my voice steady but guarded. "Is this your name?" the voice on the other end asked. It was a woman's voice, calm and professional. "Yes, this is her," I replied, bracing myself for whatever news might follow. "I'm calling from a legal firm," the woman continued. "I'm afraid there's been a development regarding your parents' estate. There's a matter that requires your attention." I felt my stomach tighten. The word estate sent a wave of dread through me. I had made it clear when my parents had been imprisoned that I had no desire to have anything to do with their finances, their possessions, or their legacy. I had walked away from all of it, walked away from them. But now, it seemed like the past was coming to find me once again. "Can you please clarify what this is regarding?" I asked, trying to remain calm. The woman explained that there had been a legal dispute over certain assets, and my parents had left behind documents that required my signature. She offered little detail over the phone, but assured me that a meeting could be arranged to discuss everything further. I hung up the phone with a sense of unease that lingered long after the conversation ended. I had moved so far past the mess of my parents' world, and yet, it seemed that the remnants of their actions would never fully let go of me. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep my distance and let the lawyers handle it, but another part of me felt a deep sense of obligation. After all, despite everything they had done to me, they were still my parents. The meeting was scheduled for a few days later, and I spent those days preparing myself mentally for what was to come. I had no idea what kind of mess I was about to walk into, but I knew I had to face it head-on. There could be no more running. When I arrived at the law office, I was met by a tall, middle-aged man in a sharp suit. He introduced himself as the attorney representing my parents' estate. He led me into a conference room, where several legal documents were spread out on the table. "I'll get straight to the point," the lawyer said, his voice measured and professional. "There are assets in your parents' name that have yet to be settled. These include several properties, as well as funds that have been frozen in various accounts." I listened closely, my heart pounding in my chest. The more he spoke, the more I realized just how entangled my life still was in my parents' mess. They had left behind a web of financial entanglements that I hadn't even known about. And now, somehow, I was going to have to clean it all up. But then, the lawyer dropped a bombshell. He slid a particular document across the table to me, his expression unreadable. "This document," he said, "is a will, one that your parents drew up just before their conviction. It specifies how their assets are to be divided and outlines certain provisions regarding your involvement in managing these assets." I blinked, my mind racing. I had expected to deal with debts, with the mess they'd left behind, but I hadn't expected this. The will. Why hadn't I been informed of this earlier? "Are you telling me," I said slowly, "that I'm expected to inherit something from them? After everything that's happened?" The lawyer nodded, though there was no satisfaction in his expression. It was clear that he didn't have much control over the situation. "There are conditions attached," he explained. "But yes, there are assets that are now yours. Your parents left you everything they couldn't manage themselves. You are the sole heir." I felt as though the floor had dropped out beneath me. Everything I had worked for, everything I had struggled to build on my own, suddenly felt fragile. I had walked away from my parents, from the toxic mess they had created, and now, here I was, being thrust back into it whether I liked it or not. I took a deep breath and picked up the will, scanning the contents. The conditions were outlined in precise, cold legal language, and it became immediately apparent that the inheritance wasn't simply a gift. It came with strings attached. I would have to manage these assets, make decisions on their behalf, and most shockingly, oversee the completion of certain business deals they had left unfinished. I pushed the papers away from me, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of it all. "I can't do this," I muttered, though I wasn't sure who I was saying it to. "The lawyer? Or myself?" "You don't have to do it alone," he said, offering a reassuring smile. "There are options available, and I can guide you through it. But I understand this is a lot to take in." I left the meeting in a daze, unsure of what my next step would be. Part of me wanted to reject everything, to refuse to take on any part of my parents' mess. But there was another part of me, the part that had always believed in fairness, in trying to make things right, that wondered if I could handle this. If I could somehow make peace with the legacy they had left behind. When I got home, I sat down at my desk, the will in front of me. The weight of the decision I had to make felt suffocating. Would I walk away from it all, or would I step into this new chapter, a chapter one never asked for? As I sat there, lost in thought, I remembered something I had read during my therapy sessions. That sometimes the hardest part of healing wasn't facing the future, it was facing the past. The past, no matter how toxic, had a way of influencing the decisions we made in the present. But this was my moment to decide. This was my chance to finally put the past where it belonged. I didn't know what I would choose, but for the first time, I knew that whatever I decided, it would be my choice. The decision to confront my parents' legacy felt like a weight I wasn't sure I could carry. For years, I had lived my life trying to outrun the shadow of their influence, and now, their legacy was back in my face, demanding attention. The idea of inheriting anything from them, especially after everything they had done, felt like a betrayal to everything I had worked for, everything I had rebuilt from the ashes of their mistakes. But as I sat there, contemplating the documents spread before me, I realized I had a choice. I wasn't the helpless child they had once tried to control. I wasn't the person they had manipulated into silence. I was a woman who had faced down betrayal, endured pain, and come out stronger on the other side. I could reject this inheritance. I could walk away and leave it all behind, just as I had walked away from them. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the answer. Rejection wasn't the same as healing. Walking away might offer temporary relief, but it wouldn't solve the deeper issue that lingered within me. The need to reclaim my own narrative, my own power. I spent the next few days reflecting, mulling over the decision. I knew that managing my parents' estate wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just about the financial aspects. It was about reclaiming control over a part of my life that had been taken from me. And as much as I feared the weight of it, part of me felt that it was time to confront the past head-on, rather than let it fester in the background of my life. I wasn't doing this for my parents. I wasn't doing this because I felt any loyalty to them. I was doing it for myself. I was doing it because, for the first time in my life, I wanted to take ownership of my story, every chapter, every painful lesson, even the parts that had once seemed beyond my control. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and legal consultations. I had no idea what I was doing at first, and there were times when I wanted to throw it all away. But I pushed through. I hired financial advisors, met with lawyers, and slowly but surely began to untangle the web of my parents' assets. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought I might break. But every time I felt overwhelmed, I reminded myself why I was doing this. I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me. It became clear early on that my parents had made a mess of everything. The estate was riddled with debts, unpaid taxes, and unfinished business deals. There were properties that needed to be sold, accounts that had to be closed, and investments that were frozen until certain conditions were met. It was more complicated than I had ever imagined, but I refused to back down. There were moments, however, when I felt like I was drowning in it all. One day, I sat at my desk surrounded by piles of paperwork, my head spinning. My phone buzzed with a new message, and for a brief moment, I wondered if it would be the thing that pushed me over the edge. But when I checked the message, it was from Ryan. "I know things have been rough for you lately. If you need to talk, I'm here. I'm proud of everything you're doing. You're stronger than you think." His words struck a chord within me. Ryan and I had come so far since our last conversation, and though I had never asked for his support, I realized that his presence in my life was a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone to call him. As soon as he picked up, I could hear the warmth in his voice. "Hey, how's everything going?" he asked. "Honestly," I replied, my voice tired. "It's a lot. I'm not sure I can do this, Ryan. There's so much to manage, and it's all a mess. I feel like I'm sinking." "Hey, I get it," he said gently. "But you're not alone in this. You don't have to handle everything on your own." "I know," I said, sighing. "But sometimes it just feels like too much." Ryan listened as I vented, his calm presence a welcome anchor in the storm of emotions I was battling. He didn't try to fix everything or offer empty advice. He simply listened and reminded me that I was capable of handling it, one step at a time. By the time I ended the call, I felt a little lighter. It wasn't a solution, but it was a reminder that I didn't have to carry the burden alone. As the weeks turned into months, the weight of the estate slowly began to feel less oppressive. I had made progress, though it wasn't without its difficulties. There were more hurdles to overcome, more legal battles to fight, but I felt stronger, more equipped to handle it all. And more than anything, I felt proud of myself for facing it head-on, instead of running from it. I was taking control of my future, piece by piece, and with each small victory, I reclaimed a part of myself that I had thought was lost forever. One day, I found myself sitting at my desk, reviewing the last of the documents I needed to sign. It was the final step in closing out my parents' estate. As I signed the papers, I felt a strange sense of closure, as though a chapter of my life that had been left open for far too long was finally coming to an end. It was a difficult and emotional process, but in the end, I realized that it wasn't the estate that had held me back. It was my own fear of confronting it. Fear of what it represented, of what I had once believed it meant about me. But now, having gone through it all, I understood that it didn't define me. I had taken control of my story, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than I had ever been before. As I stood up from my desk, the weight that had once felt so heavy now seemed lighter. The past no longer had a grip on me. I had released it, not by rejecting it, but by accepting it for what it was and moving forward. And in that moment, I knew with certainty that whatever came next, I was ready for it. As the dust settled, I found myself standing at a crossroads. The estate was finally closed, the legal battles resolved. My parents' world was behind me, and with it, all the pain and betrayal that had once felt like an endless storm. But in its place, I realized something powerful. I had rebuilt my life. I had made it through the darkest of days, and I was now stronger, more independent than I had ever been before. The process had been grueling, and at times, it had felt like an impossible journey. But through it all, I had found pieces of myself that I thought had been lost forever. I had reclaimed my narrative. I had taken control of my story. I had learned that healing wasn't about running away from your past. It was about owning it, learning from it, and using it to fuel your future. But even as I stood on the other side, it wasn't easy to fully let go of the past. My parents' actions had shaped so much of my life, and the scars they left behind were still present, though less visible now. The memories still haunted me at times, whispers of guilt, of anger, of regret. I had no illusions that everything would be perfectly okay just because the legal matters were settled. I knew that true healing took time. Still, I had come a long way, and I had something now that I had never truly had before: peace. A sense of calm, a quiet assurance that no matter what came next, I was capable of handling it. It was late one evening when I received a call that would mark yet another turning point in my life. The number on my phone was familiar, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw who it was. It was Ryan. "Hey, I've been thinking," he said, his voice filled with a warmth I hadn't heard before. "I know things have been crazy, but I wanted to check in with you. How are you really doing?" I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. "I'm doing better. It's been a long journey, but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again." "That's great to hear," he replied. "You know, I've been meaning to ask you something. I've been thinking about how much you've grown, how strong you are now. I've seen you face down your past and come out the other side, and I admire that more than you know." "Thank you, Ryan," I said softly. "I couldn't have done it without your support. It's meant a lot to me." There was a pause on the other end, a moment of silence that felt heavy with meaning. Then Ryan spoke again, his tone serious but kind. "You're an amazing person, and I know you don't always see it, but you're stronger than you think. If you're ready, I'd love to take things further with you. Maybe we can build something together, something real." The weight of his words hit me in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about what he was saying, it was about the possibility of opening myself up to someone again. After everything I had been through, the idea of trusting someone, of letting them in, felt terrifying. But it also felt right. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. "For the first time in a long time, I think I am." And so, with that, a new chapter began to unfold. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't without its challenges. But it was mine to shape, mine to live. In the months that followed, I found myself growing in ways I hadn't expected. Ryan and I built a deeper connection, one based on mutual respect, honesty, and a shared understanding of what it meant to face adversity. We supported each other through the ups and downs, and slowly but surely, I began to believe that love wasn't a trap or a manipulation. It could be something pure, something real. But more than that, I found myself in a place of self-love that I had never known before. I no longer sought validation from others. I no longer needed anyone to tell me my worth. I knew deep down that I was enough. I had fought my way out of the darkness, and now I was standing tall in the light of my own strength. One evening, as I sat outside on my balcony, sipping tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought back to everything that had led me here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggle, it had all been part of the journey. And as much as it had hurt, it had also taught me invaluable lessons. I had learned that healing wasn't linear. Some days would be harder than others, and that was okay. But I had also learned that I was capable of more than I ever thought possible. I had survived the storm, and now, I was ready to embrace whatever came next. And then, as if in that quiet moment of reflection, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to find Ryan standing in the doorway, a soft smile on his face. "You look peaceful," he said, his eyes warm with affection. "I am," I replied, smiling back at him. "I finally feel at peace with everything. With the past, with the present, and with us." He walked over and sat beside me, his hand brushing against mine. We sat in silence for a while, watching the stars appear in the sky above us. It felt like the beginning of something new, something that had been waiting for me all along. The truth was, I would never fully escape the past. It would always be a part of me, a chapter in my life that had shaped who I was. But I didn't need to run from it anymore. I had made peace with it, accepted it as part of my story. And now I was ready to move forward. Whatever the future held, I knew I had the strength to face it. Because I had already faced the hardest battle of all, and I had come out victorious. The end.